On a first-class flight with Aurora Air, everything seemed perfectly ordinary until Alicia Monroe, a well-dressed black woman, stepped into seat 1A. Within minutes, the stares began. Soft whispers followed, sharp enough to cut through the cabin. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" A harmless question on the surface, but it became the spark that ignited a storm of public humiliation 30,000 feet above the ground. Now, imagine this were you sitting in first class, ticket paid in full, dignity earned through years of hard work. How would you react when someone treats you like a servant because of your skin color? Would you get angry, stay silent, or smile to prove your worth goes far beyond their prejudice? Alicia chose a fourth option, a calm that could freeze fire. She simply lifted her phone, and in a voice as steady as glass, she said, "Connect me to the board of directors. I think it's time I buy this airline." No one knew. The woman they had just looked down on was about to become the owner of the very airline they worked for. Today's story will remind you of one simple truth sometimes. Justice doesn't need to shout it, just needs one quiet phone call to shake the skies themselves. If you believe in the power of calm and intelligence, like, share, and subscribe as we begin the remarkable journey of Alicia Monroe. On a first-class flight with Aurora Air, the soft cabin lights glowed against rows of rich brown leather seats. Everything from seats 1A to 1F exuded quiet luxury, the kind that made it seem like everyone here belonged to the same world. A world where a boarding pass wasn't just a ticket, but a statement of status. But that morning, that world shifted just a little when a black woman in a deep blue suit stepped aboard, pulling a small silver suitcase. Her name was Alicia Monroe, CEO of Monroe Holdings, a global investment empire. No one on that flight knew it, not yet. She walked to seat 1A, smiling politely at the flight attendant. "Good morning. I'm Alicia Monroe." The attendant, a young woman named Melanie Parker, hesitated. Her eyes flicked from Alicia's neatly pinned curls to her tailored suit, then stopped on the color of her skin. "Oh, I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. This seat is for first-class passengers." Alicia's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I know. This is my seat." Melanie frowned, forcing a tight smile. "Are you sure you're not accompanying another passenger? Maybe as an assistant or staff member?" The words dropped into the quiet cabin like a pebble into a still pond, ripples of tension spreading through curious eyes. The man in seat 1B, Bradley Thompson, a silver-haired investment consultant, cleared his throat. "First time flying first class. Don't worry, we'll help you get used to it." He said it lightly, but the way he stressed "we" and "you" made the distance clear. Alicia stayed composed. She handed over her ticket again, her voice firm but not raised. "This is a first-class ticket. My name's right there. You can check if you'd like." Melanie glanced down, then nodded awkwardly. "Yes, my apologies for the misunderstanding." Alicia took her seat, but the air in the cabin stayed heavy, a mix of embarrassment, pride, and unspoken prejudice. The plane began to taxi. Melanie made her way through the aisle, pouring champagne for seats 1B, 1C, 1D. But when she reached 1A, she hesitated and set down only a glass of water. Bradley smirked. "Careful, Melanie. New people might spill wine on expensive suits." A few passengers chuckled. Alicia said nothing. She just exhaled quietly and looked out the window, where sunlight shimmered on the plane's wing. If it were you sitting there, surrounded by sideways glances and half-jokes that cut deep, what would you do? Would you lash out, protest or stay silent to keep your dignity intact, most of us would want to shout, demand fairness. But Alicia was different. She'd been here before. Born and raised in Southside Chicago, she knew what it felt like to be judged before saying a single word. Her mother, a night shift nurse, used to tell her, "You'll have to be twice as good just to get halfway there, baby girl." Alicia smiled faintly at the memory. Her mother never taught revenge, only how to hold your head high when the world tries to lower it. Melanie returned, this time her tone sharper. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I need to verify your identity again. It seems the system hasn't updated properly." Alicia met her eyes, smile unchanged. "You can confirm it with your management office. And when you call, tell them Alicia Monroe is seated in 1A. Melanie frowned, about to reply. But Bradley cut in half mocking. Maybe she works for some wealthy client. These days they send assistants to test the seat first. You know, more laughter. Alicia unlocked her phone, her voice calm but steel sharp. "Connect me with the board of directors at Aurora Air." Every eye turned toward her. Melanie stepped back, assuming she was just an angry passenger, but Alicia's voice stayed, even no shouting. No threat. "I think it's time we discussed my acquisition of this airline." No one laughed now. No one spoke. Bradley froze. Melanie flushed red. Alicia, meanwhile, looked utterly composed as if she were discussing the weather. That silence that was the moment power shifted. Those who'd looked down on her were now scrambling to figure out who she really was. And just seconds later, when her phone lit up with Aurora Air Headquarters, Executive Board, everything aboard Flight 1A from Atlanta to New York changed forever. Alicia tilted her head, speaking softly into the phone. "Yes, let's set up an emergency meeting. I'd like to review your crew training policy today. No yelling, no threats, just a few quiet words enough to make everyone realize that true power doesn't come from volume, but from position." She didn't need to prove her worth with words, because in that moment, under the stunned gazes of everyone around her, Alicia Monroe embodied a rare truth. When you know who you are, the world has no choice but to adjust. The flight continued, but no one dared to joke again. Alicia stayed silent, gazing out at the open sky. She knew this wasn't just another flight. It was one of life's little tests, a reminder that justice doesn't always sound like thunder. Sometimes it's just a single drop of rain falling at the perfect time. And in moments like this, she always remembered her mother's words. They won't see you for who you are until you rise higher than the sky they thought you belonged to. That day, in Seat 1A, Alicia wasn't just flying. She was rewriting the definition of respect. As the plane leveled off at 32,000 feet, Alicia Monroe quietly closed the magazine resting on her tray table and took a deep breath. The whispers and curious stares from earlier had faded into the steady hum of the engines. She no longer cared about the man's sideways glances or the flight attendant's awkward tension, because Alicia had long since learned that those who are truly strong don't prove themselves in noisy rooms. They simply know where they're going and why they belong there. At 40 years old, Alicia Monroe was the CEO of Monroe Holdings, a vast investment group spanning finance, energy, transportation, and aerospace technology. To many, her name symbolized power, influence, and the kind of wealth most people couldn't even imagine. But to Alicia, behind all the billion-dollar contracts and international boardrooms still lived the memory of a black girl from Southside Chicago, a place where every dream demanded sweat, and respect was never freely given. Her mother, Lorraine Monroe, worked night shifts as a hospital nurse, studying between breaks just to provide a better life for her daughter. She didn't say much, but she repeated one line through all of Alicia's childhood: "You've got to be twice as good just to get halfway there." At first, it sounded like a gentle warning, but over time, those words became a quiet flame burning inside her. It didn't make her bitter, it made her clear-eyed. She understood early that fairness isn't guaranteed, but dignity is something no one can take from you unless you hand it over yourself. When she was 12, Alicia watched her mother get yelled at by a white patient in the middle of a hospital hallway. Her mother stayed silent, lowered her head, and kept working. At home that night, Alicia asked, "Why didn't you say something back?" Lorraine replied, "Because I don't have time to teach every person respect. But I do have time to teach you how to live in a way that demands it." That answer shaped Alicia's entire life. She excelled in school, earned a full scholarship to Columbia University, and later to Harvard Business School. In a world where black women were often seen as symbols of diversity rather than leaders of power, Alicia let her achievements speak louder than any label. She joined an international investment bank, climbing each rung through discipline and intelligence never flashy, but always unstoppable. People remembered her for how she entered a meeting room, shoulders straight, eyes steady, voice calm and deep enough to quiet the loudest ego. She didn't need to dominate a room. She simply commanded it. That morning's flight from Atlanta to New York was more than business. Alicia was on her way to finalize the acquisition of 47% of Aurora Air, one of America's oldest airlines. To her, it wasn't just another investment deal, it was symbolic. She wanted to prove that a black woman didn't just have the right to fly, she could own the very skies themselves. She opened her laptop. Numbers filled the screen: profit reports, shareholder summaries, merger contracts awaiting her final signature. Everything was ready. All she had to do was land in New York, meet the board, and close the deal. But after the incident on this very flight, the stares, the tone in Melanie's voice, Bradley's smug laughter, Alicia realized something deeper. Aurora Air's culture wasn't ready for the future she intended to build. She had told her advisors once, "We can't build the future on the foundations of old prejudice. If I buy Aurora, the first thing I'll change isn't the finances, it's how people treat each other." And now, sitting right here in seat 1A, she was witnessing that truth firsthand. Behind every cold number in her spreadsheets, Alicia was still deeply human. There were moments she thought of her father, the man who left when she was just 4, leaving her and her mother to wrestle with overdue bills and winter nights. He once promised to take her on her first airplane ride for her 5th birthday. That promise was never kept. Maybe that's why, every time a plane lifted off, Alicia's heart ached not from fear, but from the memory of that childhood dream of seeing the world from above. Today, she wasn't that little girl anymore. She was in seat 1A, the very first seat, the seat of direction and command. Yet the world still wasn't entirely ready to accept that image. Still, Alicia felt no bitterness, only a quiet smile, slow, knowing, resolute, because she understood something most people never do. Some battles don't require shouting, and some revolutions happen in silence through a calm gaze, a steady hand, and one phone call powerful enough to shake an entire system. She opened her phone and scrolled through messages from Marcus Hill, Executive Vice President of Monroe Holdings. His latest text read, "Good luck, Alicia, Not that you'll need it. They have no idea what's coming." Alicia chuckled softly. He was right. They didn't know, but soon they would. And that's where the next part of our story begins, where a small insult at 32,000 feet becomes the spark that drives Alicia to act immediately. From an ordinary flight, she would transform humiliation into a declaration of dignity and justice. That phone call she made wasn't about teaching anyone a lesson. It was the beginning of something far greater, a transformation that would ripple through Aurora Air and the entire aviation industry, where, for decades, people like her had to prove they even belonged in the front row before the plane began its descent. Alicia whispered to herself, "If they can't see my worth when I board this plane, they'll have no choice but to see it when I walk off as the owner of this airline." When the boarding chime echoed through the terminal, Alicia Monroe closed her laptop and carefully slipped it into her bag. She always preferred boarding last, not out of arrogance, but because she cherished those quiet minutes of simply watching the world move, people rushing by, others scrolling through their phones, and a few cold glances cast toward anyone who didn't quite look like they belonged. She stood, straightened the lapels of her deep blue suit, and walked toward the first-class check-in counter for Aurora Air. It was supposed to be a routine flight Atlanta to New York, but for Alicia, it carried weight. Not only was a multi-billion-dollar deal waiting at the other end, she was also quietly observing the true culture of the airline that was about to become part of her portfolio. At the counter stood Stacy Miller, a young blonde attendant with a professional smile and eyes that flicked over Alicia's ticket a little too long, as if searching for something that didn't fit. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Stacy said lightly, her voice pitched just loud enough for the people in line behind to hear. "Are you sure you're at the right counter? This one's for first-class passengers." Alicia's expression didn't change. She held out her e-ticket. "Yes, that's correct. This is my ticket." Stacy took the phone, studied the screen longer than necessary, then smiled half polite, half doubtful. "Oh, right. I just wanted to make sure. We occasionally have guests who book the wrong class." The polite words dropped into the air like a pin, sharp enough for a middle-aged man behind Alicia to smirk. Alicia simply replied, calm and brief, "That's all right. Anyone can make a mistake, can't they?" Her tone was soft, but her gaze so steady that Stacy faltered. The attendant began typing faster than usual, pretending to be busy. Yet the quick glances she kept stealing, part suspicion, part self-defense, said everything. It wasn't that she doubted the ticket. She doubted this woman belonged in that space of quiet luxury. Alicia accepted her boarding pass, thanked the attendant, and walked toward security. Behind her, two employees whispered, "She looks more like PR staff than a first-class passenger." Yeah, but something about her walk, it doesn't quite fit. Alicia smiled. She'd heard words like that her entire life, harmless on the surface, yet soaked in subtle bias. They weren't insults, they were soft suspicions, wrapped in professionalism and delivered with a smile. But, to Alicia, those whispers had become background noise, a sound she'd long since trained her heart to ignore. A young black boy, maybe 10 years old, standing in the economy line with his mother, caught sight of her. His eyes lit up. "Mom, look, she's wearing a suit like the people on TV." His mother smiled. "See that, baby? That's what you study for, to be like her someday." Alicia heard them and nodded gently. That small moment pulled her back 30 years to the girl in a faded dress, sitting in a worn-out community library, dreaming of a world where people were judged by talent, not color. She thought, if I'd stopped every time someone doubted me, I'd still be in Southside, not boarding any plane at all. At Gate A6, passengers were lining up. The gate agent, Evan Brooks, glanced at Alicia's ticket and frowned. "Sorry, ma'am, this really is a first-class ticket." Alicia nodded. "Yes, Gate A6 seat, 1A. Evan chuckled softly, that same hint of disbelief. "Oh, just double-checking. We've had a few guests lately. Picked the wrong gate. There it was again. Picked the wrong gate." The polite translation of, "I don't think you belong here." Alicia didn't argue. She simply recalled her mother's words, "People will see you through their own eyes, not through who you are. So don't waste time trying to change their eyes, keep your own vision clear." She handed over the ticket, took back the forced smile he offered, and walked on. Inside her bag was the contract waiting for her signature, and in just a few hours, she'd become the largest shareholder of the very airline these people worked for. Even if they checked her ticket 3 more times, she would still say, "Thank you," and keep walking. To most bystanders, nothing about that morning seemed remarkable. But to Alicia, these were pieces of a larger puzzle, a portrait of how society quietly decides who deserves to be where. Discrimination at the check-in counter carried no harsh words, no overt hostility. It was subtle, polite, procedural, the kind of prejudice easy to dismiss with. They were just following policy. But when policy only ever falls hardest on certain people, it becomes the most dangerous kind of bias, the kind that hides behind professionalism. Alicia knew this well, and she also knew that even a single flare of anger could brand her as the difficult black woman. So she chose silence not from fear, but from strategy. She would let the truth speak for itself, in a way the world couldn't deny. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, a cool gust brushed her face. She lifted her eyes to the silver fuselage of the plane, the Aurora Air logo gleaming in the sunlight. Founded in 1952, respected, prestigious, yet still an emblem of an older world, a world where only certain faces were truly welcomed in first class. Alicia realized she was about to do more than close a business deal. She was about to change the lens through which this world saw people like her, not through boarding passes, but through vision and integrity. Inside the cabin, her gaze swept across the seated passengers. Each look that met hers felt like another quiet test, but she was long past being tested. And as she settled into seat 1A, she had no idea that in just a few minutes, that unspoken test of belonging was about to reach an entirely new level. It would no longer be subtle. It would be public humiliation, and it would mark the very moment Aurora Air's world began to shake. As Alicia Monroe stepped through the first-class cabin door, she immediately sensed the change in atmosphere, the faint scent of expensive perfume, the soft hum of polite conversation, and the way every head turned toward her for a brief second before quickly looking away, as if nothing had happened. But in that single moment, Alicia read it all surprise, doubt, and a trace of discomfort. She placed her leather bag in the overhead compartment, straightened her deep blue suit jacket, and took her seat in 1A, a spot she always chose. Not for the view or the window light, but because it gave her perspective, the first seat, the front line, where she could see everything. Just as she buckled her seatbelt, the lead flight attendant, Melanie Parker, spoke, her voice smooth but slightly strained. "Excuse me. Ma'am, may I check your ticket one more time?" Alicia looked up, her expression calm, her voice patient. "You already checked it at the gate." Melanie gave a quick, uneasy smile. Yes, just a formality. We've had a few seating duplicates lately. Alicia silently handed over her ticket. No protest, no irritation, just that steady gaze that made Melanie hesitate for a beat. There was something in the woman's calmness, a quiet authority that made others feel small, confidence without noise. In the seat beside her, Bradley Thompson, a white middle-aged businessman, folded up his Wall Street Journal. He turned toward her with a friendly smile, the kind of friendly reserved for people you assume are new to the room. "First time flying first class?" he asked, his tone half joking. Alicia tilted her head, offering a faint smile. "Not exactly. I travel quite a bit." Bradley chuckled, leaning back in his seat. "Ah, I see. My company's got a diversity program, too. They've been promoting a few people, like you, into higher positions lately. A commendable effort, really." The air around them seemed to thicken. The words came coated in good intentions, so much so that they almost disarmed any immediate reply. Alicia kept her eyes on the clouds drifting outside the window. She knew that if she turned, if she responded too sharply, the narrative would instantly flip from his rudeness to her overreaction. So she smiled instead. It's good that companies are beginning to recognize the value of diversity. Bradley laughed. "Value, I'd say. They're just doing it to avoid lawsuits." Alicia turned then, her voice low and even. "Maybe, but sometimes even changes made out of fear pave the way for what's right." Bradley fell silent, caught off guard by the quiet weight of her words. Melanie returned, handing Bradley a glass of white wine and a warm towel. Then she glanced at Alicia, hesitating. "What would you like to drink?" "Ma'am, just water." "Thank you," Alicia replied. Melanie nodded but forgot. 20 minutes passed. No water. Alicia didn't remind her. She simply kept working on her laptop, her eyes pausing on one particular line in the open document Aurora Air acquisition deal, pending signatures. How ironic, the very airline where she now sat, being treated as though she didn't belong, was about to become part of her own company. The cabin was quiet except for the steady hum of the engines. Bradley broke the silence again, unable to stand it. "So, what line of work are you in? If I may ask." Alicia didn't look up. "Investments." "Ah, like a financial broker," he said with a smirk. "Not exactly," she replied, eyes still on her screen. "I run an investment firm." Bradley laughed, assuming she was joking. "Well then, you must have quite a boss." This time, Alicia looked up. "I do, and that boss happens to be me." Bradley froze. 1 second. 2. Then he looked away, pretending to adjust his cufflinks. Melanie returned with the water at last, her hand trembling slightly, a few drops spilling onto the tray. Alicia smiled, calmly dabbing the spill with a napkin. "It's all right. Thank you." Her tone was soft, but something in that softness made Melanie blush with quiet shame. If it were you, how would you feel being treated that way, scrutinized, doubted? Your right to sit in a seat questioned simply because you didn't look like the others. But Alicia didn't see the world through anger. She knew most people weren't cruel, just conditioned, raised inside walls they never stopped to notice. And she'd learned something vital. You can't teach respect by shouting it into someone's face. Sometimes, it's enough for them to feel small in the presence of your composure. Before takeoff. Bradley tried one last time to recover his pride. He chuckled awkwardly. "You know, the world's gone crazy. These days, women hold more power than us men." Alicia closed her laptop slowly and replied, her tone steady as stone. Not more. We're just reclaiming what was ours all along." She turned toward the window. Sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the wing as the aircraft lifted from the runway, smooth but decisive. And somewhere deep inside her, something else lifted too. The unshakable belief that every time the world tried to belittle her, she moved one step closer to proving her true worth. Discrimination in first class wasn't subtle anymore. It was open, unapologetic, sometimes wrapped in the thin silk of politeness. But instead of letting it wound her, Alicia chose something different. She let it expose itself until those who thought they were judging her were forced to confront their own reflection. She knew one truth better than anyone as long as she stayed calm. The world would eventually adjust to her, not the other way around. And right there, as the plane climbed through the first layer of clouds, Alicia knew her real test had only just begun. Ahead lay more than just a flight to New York. It was the beginning of a reckoning, one that would make not only an airline, but perhaps an entire industry look in the mirror. When the plane reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign clicked off, and first class slipped into its familiar rhythm, the soft clink of glassware, the low murmur of a few work conversations, the mingled scent of white wine and European-style breakfasts warming in the galley up front. Alicia Monroe remained still in 1A, eyes on the window mind, quietly taking everything in. She wasn't the type to scrutinize every move people made, but over a lifetime she'd learned this truth to understand society. Sometimes all you need to see is who gets served first and who gets served after. Melanie Parker, the lead flight attendant, moved down the aisle, a polished silver tray balanced on her hand. She stopped at Bradley Thompson's seat, the middle-aged man beside Alicia, the one who'd just been holding court about diversity programs with smug assurance. White or red wine? Sir Bradley smiled pleasantly. White, and a hot towel, if you've got one. Of course, sir. Melanie poured the wine, set the glass delicately in front of him, and added a steaming white towel. Everything looked perfect. She turned toward 1A, where Alicia sat composed, their eyes meeting for a beat. Would you like something to drink? Ma'am, Alicia smiled. Water. Please. Thank you. Melanie nodded, set the tray on the service cart, and walked away. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. The water never came. Alicia glanced at Bradley. He already had a second pour. She didn't get angry. She didn't sigh. She simply reached into her bag for a small water bottle, the kind she always carried on flights, twisted the cap, and poured it into the plastic cup. No one noticed that tiny ritual, but to her it mattered, her way of staying calm. A quiet practice that reminded her my emotions are mine to govern, not theirs. Half an hour later, breakfast service began. Bradley received a plate, golden fried eggs, a still warm croissant, a neat fan of fruit laid across crisp porcelain. Alicia's tray arrived 5 minutes after his. When she peeled back the lid, the eggs were cold. The butter had melted into a slick sheen. She looked at the plate and offered the faintest smile. No complaint. Bradley glanced over, half curious, half mocking. Not eaten, or is the menu a little? Not to your taste, Alicia answered. I'm used to eating things cold. Her tone was so light, no one could tell if she meant it literally or not. From the row behind, a man in a gray suit turned and spoke in that half-joking, half-serious register. These days are strange, aren't they? People of color everywhere, front desks, even the cockpit. The age of promoting the wrong folks, Am I right?" He said it loud enough for the cabin to hear. No one reacted. A few stared out the window. A few offered tight, uncomfortable smiles. The polite silence of a civilized society where people don't agree, but won't risk speaking up. Alicia heard every word. She set her cup down without turning and replied softly. As if to herself, every new era begins with the discomfort of those unwilling to change. The man behind her fell quiet. A few passengers looked at Alicia, then away again, as if afraid to be caught thinking. Someone else might have tapped the call button, lodged a complaint, or crafted a scathing review. But Alicia knew that when you're a black woman mid-air, every reaction sits under a magnifying glass of bias. One firm sentence can be called rude. One mild objection can be labeled disruptive. One act of self-protection can be twisted into threatening. She'd seen it too many times. From corporate ballrooms to global summits, Alicia understood that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategic resolve. It lets people feel the weight of their own misconduct. She thought of her mother, Lorraine, the woman who'd swallowed insults in hospital corridors to keep the job that fed her child. "You can't win every fight with your fists," her mother used to say, "but you can make them lose by standing tall, by showing them you're bigger than they imagined." Alicia smiled at the memory. She lifted the silver fork and ate in small, unhurried bites. In that moment, breakfast stopped being breakfast. It became a silent declaration of dignity. Melanie returned, tray in hand. "I'm sorry, I forgot your water." Alicia looked up, the same gentle smile in place. "It's all right. I've got my own." Her voice was so light no one could call it sarcasm, yet no one could mistake it for absolution. Melanie dipped her head, voice smaller now. "Thank you." The moment was brief, but something in Alicia's tone made Melanie pause. For the first time that day, the difference between polite performance and genuine respect seemed to click. Bradley said nothing more. He turned to the window, the blue sky fading softly in sunlight. Maybe, deep down, embarrassment had started to settle in. The flight moved on, and in that hush, Alicia straightened and reopened her laptop. On the screen, the Aurora Air acquisition contract glowed. She reread the final clause, "Deal to be completed upon board approval next week." She exhaled. If everything stayed on track, in less than 2 weeks, this airline, the place where they forgot her water, where suspicion met her at every step, would list her name among its largest shareholders. Ironic? Yes. But to Alicia, it wasn't revenge. It was how fate works when life places you where you must endure something. Not to hurt you, but to show you that you can change it at the root. She glanced at Bradley, then out the window. The sky beyond was glass clear, not a cloud in sight, and she thought, they might forget to serve me today, but tomorrow they'll have to serve thousands like me the right way. She closed her eyes, letting the sunlight warm her face, a quiet omen of what was coming, a change no one in this cabin could yet imagine. But prejudice never stops at the little things. Once you're seen as someone who doesn't belong, even walking to a public space becomes a test. And that moment came soon enough, just minutes later, when Alicia stood up to head to the restroom. The steady hum of the engines played like a familiar background score. Alicia Monroe leaned her head lightly against the seat, her gaze drifting out the window where clouds floated in slow, golden white layers beneath the morning sun. She was silent, not from fatigue, but because her mind was quietly replaying fragments of memory. small pieces of a past she often tried to bury, but that never truly disappeared. After the prejudice she had just faced, Alicia didn't feel anger. What she felt was a familiar ache, the feeling of someone who spent her entire life walking into rooms where people believed she didn't belong. And when that feeling returned, she didn't resist it. She let it come. Let it remind her just how far she'd climbed. Alicia had been born on the south side of Chicago, a place where every car horn and flickering streetlight carried a story of survival. Her mother, Lorraine Monroe, worked nights as a nurse at a public hospital, and during the day she picked up extra shifts at a small neighborhood clinic. Some mornings she'd come home exhausted, still in scrubs, but she'd always make breakfast for her daughter before sleeping. Their tiny two-room apartment had peeling walls and creaking floors. In winter, the cold slipped through the window frames, and her mother stuffed rags into the cracks to keep the warmth in. But strangely, Alicia never remembered those years with sadness. What stayed with her was her mother's soft humming, their laughter over a wobbly old table, and the words that would shape her life forever. You've got to climb so high that they get dizzy trying to look up at you. Her mother never spoke of revenge or equality. She taught Alicia to rise, not to look down on anyone, but to reach a height where no one could look down on her. Alicia remembered one morning vividly. She was 10. Her mother had just finished a 14-hour shift, still in her nurse's uniform, standing in line at a discount grocery store, holding a small basket of cheap supplies. A white woman ahead of her turned to a friend and muttered, "They should have a separate line for people like her. The smell of disinfectant is too much." Lorraine Monroe bowed her head, said nothing, but that night, Alicia saw her mother standing in the kitchen for a long time, fists clenched. The little girl asked, "Mom, why didn't you say something?" Her mother's reply was calm, steady, because some people aren't worth teaching with words. They only learn from what you achieve. That sentence became Alicia's compass. All through high school, she had no new clothes, but she was always at the top of her class, while other kids dreamed of being singers or actors. Alicia dreamed of an executive chair, not for the money, but for the look on her mother's face when people in suits had to stand and greet her with respect. She worked in the library cleaning tables, stacking books, and secretly reading finance journals after hours. When she got a full scholarship to college, her mother cried not out of pride, but out of fear. Fear that the world would break her daughter's spirit. And in many ways, she was right. Alicia walked through doors that slammed in her face, sat in meetings where people spoke to her without meeting her eyes, saw contracts fall through with polite excuses. "We're just not ready for a leader like you." But every time that happened, Alicia remembered her mother's words, "Make them dizzy trying to look up at you." So she climbed, slowly, steadily. She had washed dishes at a cafe before going to the office, been mistaken for an assistant by clients, watched male colleagues steal her ideas and get promoted. But Alicia never let resentment take root. Instead, she studied those moments, each one a lesson in how people reveal their character when they hold power. She learned that true power isn't in the title you wear, it's in your ability to stay composed when others try to shake you. And that was the power that defined her, now a woman who could be dismissed in first class, yet remain so calm it forced others to reflect on themselves. Back in the present, the plane glided through white clouds. Alicia tilted her head slightly and caught her reflection in the window and behind it. She saw her mother's face, those same steady eyes, watching. "Mom," she whispered, "they can wound me with words, but they can never take away the pride you taught me." A wave of emotion rose within her, not tears, but a firm, quiet conviction that every hardship has value if you know how to turn it into strength. She smiled softly, touching the cool glass, as if reaching back through time. Somewhere in that gesture, she felt her mother's warmth, not a physical heat, but that invisible force that had always pushed her forward, even when the world turned its back. If anyone looked at Alicia now, they would only see an elegant woman sitting quietly in first class. No one would guess that within her was an entire history of struggle, resilience, and dignity. She never saw herself as a victim. She saw herself as proof of one simple truth: when you refuse to let others define your worth, they will eventually have to redefine their world. The plane jolted slightly, and the captain's voice announced turbulence ahead. Seat belts clicked. Melanie passed by, stopping briefly at Alicia's row, hesitation in her tone. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Alicia nodded, her smile gentle. "I'm fine, thank you." Melanie pressed her lips together, almost wanting to say more, but didn't. And maybe, in that fleeting moment, the young flight attendant finally understood something she never had before, that Alicia's calm wasn't the habit of someone used to enduring it, was the strength of someone who had learned to survive with grace. But sometimes, even calm is tested. When someone has endured enough, the world will give them a moment to respond not with anger, but with power. And that moment was about to find Alicia. Just minutes later, when she stood up to walk to the restroom, first class aboard Aurora Air had settled back into calm after breakfast. Afternoon sunlight spilled across polished trays, glinting off the sleeve of flight attendant Melanie Parker as she cleared the aisles. Alicia Monroe sat quietly in seat 1A, finishing the last page of a contract. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, the real test of this flight would begin, no longer a passing look or a whispered slight, but a public humiliation. Feeling the need to stretch and use the restroom, Alicia unbuckled her seatbelt and rose. Melanie noticed her and paused, offering a polite, slightly strained smile. "I'm sorry, Ms. Monroe. The first-class lavatory is out of order right now. You can use the one in the back in economy." Alicia frowned slightly. "Out of order? I just saw the gentleman in 1C use it a few minutes ago." Melanie hesitated, tray in hand, voice dropping. "Yes, there's been a small technical issue. We're handling it, but it's best if you use the one in the rear cabin." Alicia looked at her, calm but unblinking. She could have argued, asked for the chief purser, but instead, she simply nodded. "All right." She said it softly, almost a whisper, yet somehow, the way she said it made Melanie uneasy. Alicia walked the length of the cabin, her heels tapping in a slow, measured rhythm on the floor. The first-class passengers watched her pass, not with curiosity, but with that strange mix of doubt and amusement. Some even chuckled quietly, as if witnessing a scene on stage. Is she really going to economy? The economy cabin was louder, crowded, close. As Alicia entered, heads turned. Some could tell she wasn't crew, but she didn't quite seem like a first-class passenger either. A little boy near the back tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why is that lady in a suit using our bathroom?" his mother whispered. "She probably works for the airline." "Honey." Alicia didn't turn, just smiled faintly. She was used to that kind of assumption, the kind that decided her poise and professionalism must belong to service, not leadership. Inside the small restroom, she faced the mirror. Harsh white light reflected a composed face, steady eyes, and a gaze that didn't waver. For a second, she saw her mother's reflection instead, Lorraine, in her nurse's uniform, enduring humiliation yet smiling through it. They're still the same. Mom, she thought quietly, but I'm not. She refreshed her lipstick, drew a deep breath, and opened the door. On her way back, she passed the crew galley. A young male attendant in a Navy uniform, Kyle Brooks, stood there chatting with a colleague. When he noticed Alicia approaching, he smirked. "Sorry," he said loudly. "Are you sure you're not one of us, part of the service crew?" The words cut through the busy cabin like a blade. Heads turned, there were snickers. A few passengers even raised their phones, thinking it was some kind of joke. Alicia stopped, straightened. Her gaze locked on Kyle. There was no anger, no shouting, just a silence so sharp it made the laughter fade. Her voice was low, steady. "What did you just say?" Kyle stepped back slightly, trying to laugh it off. "Oh, nothing. Just kidding. Don't take it so seriously." Someone from a nearby row called out, laughing, "Relax." "Kyle, you scared her." Laughter spread, rippling through the cabin, turning the air into a stage for mockery. Alicia didn't respond. She turned and began walking toward first class again, slow, deliberate steps, each one echoing with quiet authority, and with every step, the laughter died. By the time she reached the curtain divider, the only thing left was the uneasy silence of shame. Back in her seat, Bradley Thompson glanced up from his newspaper. "Everything all right?" "You were gone a while," Alicia replied calmly. "Nothing much. They just need more time to learn who they're actually serving." Her tone was light as air, but something in her eyes made Bradley fall silent. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he could feel that the air itself had shifted, heavy with a quiet kind of power. Moments later, Melanie appeared, her face tight with concern. "Ms. Monroe, was there some kind of incident in the back?" Alicia looked up at her, expression gentle but razor sharp. "What would you think if I told you one of your crew members asked me if I worked as a flight attendant?" Melanie froze. She swallowed hard before managing. I'm so sorry. I'll file a report right away." Alicia shook her head softly. "No need. I'll handle it directly with Aurora Air's executive board." The words were calm, yet they made Melanie's heart sink. She didn't understand why, but instinct told her this woman was no ordinary passenger. Anyone else might have cried, or shouted, or demanded to see the flight manager. But Alicia didn't. She knew that sometimes silence isn't submission. It's the stillness before the storm no one else sees coming. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed bright. The title line, clear Aurora Air, acquisition deal pending signature. Her cursor hovered over the final signature field, the one reserved for the buyer. She rested her hand on the mouse, then lifted her eyes, scanning the same cabin that had mocked her moments earlier. "Fine," she thought. "If they want to see me as staff, then I'll serve them by cleaning out this entire system." The plane cruised on through layers of quiet cloud, peaceful as if nothing had happened. But inside Alicia, something had ignited not fury, but resolve and focus. In her memory, her mother's voice echoed softly when they try to push you down. "Stand taller. One day they'll have to lift their eyes to meet yours." Alicia closed her eyes and smiled. Yes, That day was coming soon, and indeed, it came sooner than anyone imagined. While the crew still believed they'd only insulted an unusual passenger, Alicia was already placing a call, one that would shake the entire airline to its core. The air in Aurora Air's first-class cabin turned thick after the incident in the aisle. Alicia Monroe had taken her seat again, outwardly calm, but her eyes were brighter than usual. Not the brightness of anger, but of someone who had reached the limit of her patience. The engine's steady drone, the wind beyond the window, everything sounded the same. But inside her, something was shifting. For years, Alicia had grown used to staying composed in the face of contempt. But this time was different. This insult wasn't just about her. It targeted the values she stood for: dignity, effort, and fairness. Melanie approached, her voice small and careful. "Ms. Monroe, we're sorry if anything has made you uncomfortable." Alicia looked up, straight at her. No trace of fury, only a calm so cold it stung. "No, Ms. Parker," she said slowly. "I'm not uncomfortable. I'm taking note." A shiver ran through Melanie at those two words. Taking note, simple, but hanging in the air like a suspended verdict. Bradley Thompson, the seatmate, tried to smooth things over. "Come on now, let's not make a big deal. Everyone slips up sometimes. Don't be so sensitive." Alicia turned to him, her voice low and precise. "You think I'm being sensitive? No, I've just gotten used to people trying to teach me how to accept humiliation." Bradley opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Just then, the cockpit door opened. A middle-aged man in a pilot's uniform stepped into the cabin. Captain Richard Sullivan, the flight's commander. "Sorry for the interruption," he said. Tone stern. "I'm told there's been a little trouble up here." Melanie stepped in close, speaking softly but loud enough for Alicia to catch. "She seems a bit agitated, sir. Possibly had a drink before boarding." Alicia turned, her eyes gone cold. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Captain Sullivan frowned, glanced at the ticket in Melanie's hand, then gave Alicia a once-over. It was a look she knew well, the look of someone deciding who deserved to be where. "Ma'am, we just need to ensure the safety of the other passengers," he said. "Can you tell me if you consumed alcohol prior to the flight?" Alicia let out a short laugh. Not amused, not mocking a laugh meant for the absurdity of the world itself. "Are you really asking me that?" "Yes," he replied, "because we've received a complaint about disruptive behavior and uncontrolled remarks." "Uncontrolled remarks," Alicia repeated softly, then looked around. "I went to the restroom. Perhaps to you, a black woman walking through first class counts as disruptive." The cabin tightened. A few passengers turned away, pretending not to hear. Bradley stared down, avoiding her gaze. Sullivan held his ground, voice hardening. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to calm down. If this continues, we may have to remove you upon landing." Alicia met his eyes and rose slowly. No raised voice, no scene. She simply took out her phone, tapped a few times, and lifted it to her ear. "Michelle," she said, so evenly it sent a chill through the cabin. "Connect me with Aurora Air's executive board. Immediately." Sullivan scowled. "What do you think you're doing?" Alicia didn't look at him. She spoke into the phone. "Yes, it's me, Alicia Monroe. I want to confirm the Aurora Air acquisition is signed right now." No one in the cabin breathed. Melanie stood frozen. Sullivan waited for the punchline, but nothing in Alicia's face or voice hinted at a joke. She lifted her head, fixed the captain with a gaze sharp as a blade, and spoke each word with glacial clarity. "You say I don't belong in first class. Fine. Let me correct that from this moment. I own this first-class cabin and everything in it." Silence fell absolute and heavy. Bradley exhaled, half panicked, half baffled. "Wait. You're saying your Alicia?" Turned to him and gave a small nod. "I'm the executive chair of Monroe Holdings, and if you read the news, you'll know Monroe has just completed the purchase of 47% of Aurora Air. Today was meant to be the official announcement, but I suppose I'll move it up, thanks to this special event." Melanie went pale and took a step back. Captain Sullivan stood rooted, blinking. You're serious?" Alicia held up the phone. On the screen, Aurora Board Conference active call. From the speaker, the voice of Marcus Hill, EVP of Monroe Holdings, carried across the cabin. "We're in session. Alicia, everyone's here. We're waiting for your directive." Alicia set the phone on the table and looked around the cabin. "Let's begin. Enter into the record flight 217 from Atlanta to New York. The crew has engaged in severe discriminatory conduct toward a passenger. I'm requesting immediate suspension of the entire operating crew pending an internal investigation." She finished, then softened her tone almost cordial. "Captain Sullivan, you may return to the cockpit. I don't wish to interfere with your work, but you should know upon landing. Aurora's legal team will be waiting." Sullivan said nothing. His face flushed. He nodded, stammered an apology, and backed into the cockpit. The door closed behind him. Melanie remained, eyes welling. I didn't know. I didn't mean." Alicia looked at her, voice gentling. "I know, but the problem isn't you. It's the system that made you believe I couldn't sit in this seat." Melanie bowed her head, speechless. No one in the cabin spoke. Only the wind outside and the light reflected across Alicia's composed face. She picked up the phone again. "Marcus, continue the session. I want interim operational authority enacted immediately." On the other end, done. Alicia ended the speaker mode, set the phone down, and turned her quiet gaze back to the window. "Mom," she thought, "they see me now clearer than ever." And as the plane began its descent, no one in the cabin realized the real shock was still ahead, because on the ground, Aurora Air's executive board was already in emergency session, and the name Alicia Monroe was about to become the center of gravity for the entire U.S. aviation industry. The air in Aurora Air's first-class cabin was still tight as a drawn string after Alicia Monroe ended the call. No one spoke, yet everyone felt it. Something had changed, not just in the atmosphere, but in the way they saw her. The woman who, just minutes ago, had been doubted and looked down upon now sat upright, serene, as if the entire sky belonged to her. Melanie Parker, the once self-assured flight attendant, stood frozen with the tray in her hands, unable to meet Alicia's eyes. Captain Richard Sullivan had retreated to the cockpit, where the silence was thick with shame, and Bradley Thompson, the man who had called her a diversity hire, could only fold his newspaper and stare into nothing. Alicia said nothing more. She simply gazed out the window, where the deep blue stretched endlessly ahead. But her mind drifted elsewhere, not to her childhood this time, but to 2 weeks earlier, on the 42nd floor of Monroe Holdings in Manhattan. That day, the meeting had lasted nearly 3 hours. The conference room was wide, lit with golden light reflecting off the oak table. Before Alicia lay a thick folder stamped with the logo of Aurora Air, across the cover, in bold print, proposed acquisition, 47% stake purchase agreement. Marcus Hill, Executive Vice President, spoke evenly, Madam Chair. The deal's nearly complete. We're just waiting for Aurora Air's board to sign off. Once that's done, you'll become the largest shareholder, effectively controlling the company. Alicia flipped through the pages, her eyes sharp. They don't know we're the buyers, do they? Marcus shook his head. No. The transaction's going through a Luxembourg subsidiary. When the announcement goes public, the press will only see the name North Star Capital. No one will suspect you're behind it. Alicia was silent for a moment. Good. I don't want them to change their behavior just because they know who I am. I want to see how they treat their customers before I officially own them. Marcus frowned slightly. You're testing them. Alicia smiled faintly. I'm not testing. I'm observing. A company can replace a CEO or rewrite its mission statement, but if its culture is rotten, everything else is just window dressing. Since then, Alicia had flown Aurora Air several times in silence as a regular passenger. Each time, she watched. She noticed the forced smiles given to black travelers. She heard the, "Excuse me, ma'am, I think you're in the wrong seat," spoken sweetly but with meaning that cut deep, and she remembered every little thing. But today, this flight had gone too far. This wasn't a mistake. It was the truth, bare and unfiltered, about a company that valued skin tone more than human worth. Alicia drew a deep breath, her reflection glimmering faintly in the window. Not the reflection of a woman seeking revenge, but of someone making a decision on principle. She picked up her phone and pressed another internal line. Marcus, are you still in the meeting? Yes. We're all here, waiting for your instruction. Is there a problem? There's been a change. I want to move up the timeline. Today, we close the deal. I want operational control of Aurora Air within 24 hours. Marcus hesitated. Madam, that'll require further approval from number... Alicia interrupted, her tone calm but firm. We have the paperwork ready. I'll take responsibility. You want a reason? This airline just gave me the most compelling one imaginable. Her eyes swept across the cabin, the passengers pretending not to listen. If a company prides itself on luxury but fails to respect its customers, then I'll teach them what true class really means. When the call ended, Alicia sat still for several seconds. No triumph, no tremor, just a deep, strange peace, the kind that comes when someone finally chooses to stand up, not out of rage, but out of conviction. She thought of her mother, Lorraine, and the old words that had guided her life. Don't fight with your fists, baby. Win with your mind. Let the people who look down on you learn to bow, not because you force them, but because they finally understand. Alicia smiled. She had done exactly that. Moments later, Melanie approached, her voice trembling. Ms. Monroe, may I speak with you privately? Alicia nodded. Go ahead. Melanie inhaled deeply, fighting for composure. I truly apologize. I didn't know you were who you are. I didn't mean. Alicia lifted a hand gently to stop her. You don't need to explain, because the fault isn't entirely yours. You're the result of a culture that taught people to see difference as suspicion. Melanie lowered her head, eyes glistening. You're right. I don't think I'll ever forget this. Alicia's tone softened. Good. Remember it and change how you see people. Not because I'm someone important, but because tomorrow you'll meet another person like me and they may not have the power to defend themselves. Melanie nodded quietly and walked away, leaving Alicia bathed in golden sunlight through the window. Outside, the sky seemed to open wider. Alicia felt lighter, not because she'd won, but because she'd finally done the right thing, in her own way. The flight continued, but from that moment on, Alicia Monroe was no longer the passenger who'd been underestimated. She had become the true pilot, not of the plane, but of the destiny of an entire airline. And, while the aircraft sailed calmly through the clouds, across New York City, a crisis meeting was underway at Aurora Air headquarters. A message from Monroe Holdings had just arrived. The deal is complete. Within hours, the entire board would have to face their new chairwoman, the very woman they once believed didn't belong in first class. Outside the window, Aurora Air's Boeing 787 glided quietly through thick layers of cloud, the midday light spilling across its silver wings. But inside the first-class cabin, Alicia Monroe knew the skies were no longer calm. She'd just made a decision few would ever dare, finalizing a corporate takeover midair, right before the eyes of those who had just looked down on her. The air in the cabin felt heavy, frozen in place. The steady hum of the engines became a backdrop for an eerie silence, the kind that settles when people suddenly realize they've wronged the very person who now holds power over their fate. Alicia drew a deep breath and opened her sleek silver laptop. Her fingers moved swiftly, connecting to the in-flight Wi-Fi. She logged into Monroe Holdings' secure system and initiated an emergency video call. The company's Blue Wing logo flashed across the screen, followed by the familiar face of Marcus Hill, Executive Vice President, and 7 board members seated in the Manhattan conference room. "Where are you right now?" Alicia Marcus asked, his tone a mix of concern and curiosity. Alicia glanced around the cabin and replied evenly, 32,000 feet above ground. And right now, I need us to make a decision. No one had time to respond before she opened an electronic file and enlarged it on screen. "I'm announcing that the Aurora Air acquisition has been accelerated. We completed the final share payment this morning, effective immediately. Monroe Holdings controls 51% of Aurora Air." A ripple of shock moved through the board. Marcus frowned. "Are you certain the Aurora board hasn't been informed?" Alicia looked straight into the camera, her voice low but cutting. "Then we'll inform them now. I'm on one of their flights, and I've just witnessed firsthand why this deal needs to close sooner than planned." As the board fell silent, she recounted the incident from the gate agent's suspicion about her ticket, to being told to use the restroom in economy, to Kyle Brooks's public humiliation in front of a crowd. There was no bitterness in her tone, only clarity, the clarity of someone who had endured much and chosen to rise above it. When she finished, Marcus's expression hardened. "What do you want to do?" Alicia closed the laptop halfway, gazing out the window. The sky outside seemed to twist with her thoughts. "I don't want revenge," she said softly. "I want reform. A company doesn't stay aloft just because its planes fly high, but because its culture doesn't drag people down. Aurora Air has forgotten that." She reopened the screen, her voice now firm and deliberate. "Marcus opened a joint session with Aurora's board of directors. I want them present now." Within minutes, 8 new windows appeared on the screen, the tense faces of Aurora Air's executives, including Walter Bennett, the current CEO. He was around 60, neatly combed silver hair, his expression cold, edged with irritation. "Ms. Monroe," he said, emphasizing every syllable. You're convening this meeting without formal authorization. This is a breach of protocol." Alicia smiled faintly, unruffled. "I understand that's what you think, Mr. Bennett, but I'm afraid you haven't been updated. Monroe Holdings is now the controlling shareholder of Aurora Air, which means, as of this moment, I have full authority to call any meeting I deem necessary." Walter Bennett's face paled. He turned to someone beside him, whispering urgently. But before he could respond, Alicia continued. "And the reason for this meeting, Mr. Bennett, is that I've just personally experienced the culture you've been running, a culture of bias, humiliation, and disrespect toward the very customers your airline claims to serve with the highest standards." Eleanor Reyes, Aurora's HR director, spoke timidly from across the table. "Ms. Monroe, perhaps there's been some misunderstanding." "No," Alicia interrupted, still calm but steely. "This isn't misunderstanding. This is consequence, the result of years spent letting prejudice live comfortably inside your employees' uniforms." A long silence followed. Every face on the screen lowered. Alicia inhaled slowly, then spoke with crisp authority. "As the new owner, I'm issuing my first directive. Walter Bennett is hereby relieved of his position effective immediately. Interim control will transfer to Marcus Hill until the board approves a new appointment." Walter shot to his feet, his face flushed red. "You can't, I can," Alicia said before he could finish. "And I just did." Eleanor turned to him and murmured quietly, "She has the authority, Walter." The room fell dead silent. Alicia closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, her voice softer now, but no less sharp. "I'm not here to destroy. I'm here to rebuild. This isn't a hostile takeover." She paused, her words slicing through the cabin's stillness like a blade. "This is responsibility, and this is justice." The sentence hung in the air, dividing it cleanly in two. On the screen, some board members bowed their heads. Behind Alicia, Melanie Parker instinctively covered her mouth. She didn't know whether to feel fear or gratitude, only that she had just witnessed a moment that would one day be retold in training sessions and leadership seminars about equality in the workplace. Alicia closed her laptop and sat quietly, her fingers interlaced. No one in the cabin dared to speak. The engines still hummed, but now the sound carried the rhythm of a new beginning. Bradley Thompson turned to her, voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the air. "You just did something incredible." Alicia kept her eyes on the window, the light glinting softly along her cheek. "No," she said. "I did what they should have done a long time ago." After a moment, she added, slowly, almost to herself, "People think justice comes from courts or governments, but sometimes it begins in a first-class seat when someone chooses silence first, then stands up at the right moment." Bradley said nothing. He simply looked at her, the woman he had underestimated hours earlier, now sitting before him as the living embodiment of the justice he'd only ever read about. As the plane began its descent, a new chapter for Aurora Air was already unfolding. But for Alicia Monroe, the journey was far from over. Because justice doesn't end with one decision, it must be rebuilt, piece by piece, by the very people who once caused the harm. The plane touched down at JFK Airport beneath the fading light of dusk. The late sun spilled through the window, glowing softly across Alicia Monroe's face, calm, not proud, yet utterly unshaken. What had happened 32,000 feet above ground was only the beginning. She knew the hardest part was still ahead on the ground, where the very people who once laughed at her would now have to face the truth they'd created. Captain Richard Sullivan's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Thank you for flying with Aurora Air." The words sounded ordinary enough yet to Alicia. They carried a bitter irony. Flying with Aurora Air. No one had truly flown with her on that flight. They had only watched and stayed silent. But silence has its price, and today she intended to make them pay it. When the cabin door opened, Alicia was the first to stand. Her steps were slow, steady, composed. Melanie Parker lowered her head as Alicia passed, too ashamed to speak. Bradley Thompson watched her go, a mix of fear and reverence in his eyes. At the airline's private reception lounge, a group was waiting. Marcus Hill and the legal team from Monroe Holdings, several Aurora Air corporate lawyers, and, most notably, Walter Bennett, the now former CEO who had been dismissed less than 2 hours earlier. The scene looked less like a meeting and more like a trial without a courtroom. Alicia entered the VIP conference room at the terminal. No one invited her to sit yet. Everyone stood as she walked in. Marcus pulled out a chair for her, a small gesture that carried the full weight of newly established authority. She took her seat, placed her laptop on the table, and opened it. The playback of the emergency meeting began. Her voice filled the room steady, commanding. This isn't a hostile takeover. This is responsibility, and this is justice. When the recording ended, silence stretched for several seconds. Then Alicia lifted her gaze toward Walter Bennett. He avoided her eyes, beads of sweat gathering at his temple. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, her tone like a blade drawn through air. "Would you like to say anything before I sign the final resolution?" Walter cleared his throat, clinging to the last of his authority. "I acknowledge there were oversights and supervision, but I hardly think one minor incident on a flight warrants dismantling the entire system." Alicia's lips curved slightly. A minor incident. She tilted her head, her eyes locking onto him. When a passenger is publicly humiliated because of the color of her skin, when an entire crew joins in laughter, you call that minor. If that's how you define it, then I understand exactly why Aurora Air has fallen so far. Marcus Hill stepped forward, setting a thick folder on the table. "Here's the preliminary audit. Ma'am, a summary of discrimination complaints within Aurora over the past 2 years. At least 37 cases dismissed without review." Walter said nothing. His lips trembled, but no words came. Alicia turned to Melanie Parker, the flight attendant standing at the end of the table, clutching her hat. "Ms. Parker," Alicia said gently, "I won't fire you today, but you'll be suspended for retraining on equity and professional ethics. Do you agree to that?" Melanie nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I agree, Ms. Monroe. I know I have a lot to learn." Alicia gave a small nod and turned to Kyle Brooks, the young attendant who had mocked her in the aisle. "And you, Mr. Brooks, what do you have to say for yourself?" Kyle lowered his head, voice hoarse. "I have no excuse. I just want to apologize. I forgot that this uniform doesn't give me the right to judge anyone." The room went completely still. Alicia looked at him, her eyes no longer cold. "Good. I accept your apology. But apologies aren't enough. Action is. After retraining, you'll join Monroe Holdings' Bridges program. You'll mentor new employees on equality and customer service. If you do it well, I might let you stay." Kyle nodded quickly, grateful for the chance he didn't deserve. Finally, Alicia turned to Captain Richard Sullivan, standing tall with his hands clasped behind him. His expression showed genuine remorse. "Ms. Monroe," he said quietly, "I was wrong. I acted on false assumptions. I accept whatever disciplinary action is required." Alicia studied him for a moment, then replied, "Captain Sullivan, I believe people can change, but only when they're brave enough to face their own mistakes. The disciplinary board will decide your formal consequences. But, personally, I hope you'll teach your young pilots that true authority doesn't come from the cockpit, but from how you treat the people you serve." Sullivan bowed his head. "Understood, ma'am." When everyone else had left, only Alicia and Marcus remained. He gave a small, knowing smile. "You realize, don't you? In less than 3 hours, you've done what the entire aviation industry has avoided for a decade." Alicia exhaled weary, but steady, her eyes still burning bright. "I didn't do it to make headlines. Marcus, I did it because I never want another woman black, white, or brown to feel small just because she sat in a seat someone else thought she didn't deserve." She rose, gathering her papers, her voice softening. "Starting today, Aurora Air won't be a place for people to prove their status. It will be a place where every passenger is called by their name and treated as a person." Marcus smiled faintly, bowing his head. "Yes, Madam Chair." As Alicia stepped out of the room, the golden sunset flooded the airport terminal. The flight crew stood in a quiet line, watching her go. No one spoke, but in their eyes was something new, something real respect. Alicia paused, turned slightly, and said not loud, but clear enough for everyone to hear, "We won't change the world with policies alone. We'll change it by remembering to treat each other like human beings." 6 weeks later, after every new policy had been enacted, the U.S. aviation industry began calling it the Aurora Effect, a reform born from within, all sparked by one flight that was supposed to be routine. And at the center of it all stood the woman they once underestimated, now the living proof that intellect and dignity can rewrite an entire corporate culture. 6 weeks after the incident that shook the industry, Aurora Air was no longer the airline passengers once knew. The once whispered hallways were now alive with meetings, reform sessions, and ideas. The nameplate that had read Walter Bennett was gone, replaced with a new one, Marcus Hill, acting CEO, and though Marcus preferred to stay out of the spotlight, everyone knew who was truly guiding every change, every decision, every new direction. Alicia Monroe. The early days were far from easy. Alicia knew that changing a culture wasn't the same as changing a CEO. It couldn't be signed into existence. It had to be planted, person by person. So she didn't begin with commands. She began with a question. If we truly want to be an airline for everyone, not just for a select few, what's the very first thing that needs to change? The question went out across the entire Aurora network. Within 2 weeks, over 4,000 employees responded. Some shared stories of watching black co-workers being disrespected by passengers and staying silent. Others admitted to joking in the wrong way about gender or religion. Even longtime managers confessed that they had never been taught how to recognize bias within themselves. Alicia read every single line, and with each story, each confession, she understood the problem wasn't just behavior, it was silence. And so, the Zero Discrimination Initiative was born. not as a slogan to print on posters, but as a pledge that every employee would sign and live by. From flight attendants and ground crews to maintenance engineers, everyone underwent a 6-week training program designed by experts in social equity and behavioral psychology. During one session, Melanie Parker stood before the class, voice trembling but eyes clear. "I used to think I was just following the rules," she said, "that doubting a passenger wasn't really my fault, but then I realized my silence was the problem, because when you don't speak up, you agree." The room fell silent, and in that moment, zero discrimination stopped being a policy. It became a promise. Meanwhile, Kyle Brooks, the young flight attendant who had once mocked Alicia, became the first volunteer for Bridges, a new Monroe Holdings funded program focused on human-centered service in modern aviation. When a reporter asked why he agreed to join, Kyle simply said, "Because I never want a black kid boarding a plane to feel they have to lower their head just to earn respect." The quote went viral, quickly becoming the centerpiece of Aurora Air's new campaign. No one needs permission to sit where they belong. Alicia didn't stop there. She extended training to the executive level to those who once believed bias was a frontline issue. She required that every promotion include an internal equity score and replaced cash bonuses with scholarships from the new Skyway Scholars Fund, offering educational grants for employees' children who dreamed of careers in aviation. "We don't just fly high," Alicia said at the fund's launch. "We learn how to lift others with us." The results came faster than anyone expected. 6 weeks after the reforms, positive customer feedback rose 38%. One elderly passenger wrote, "I used to dread flying the tension in the staff, the coldness in the cabin. But on my last flight, something was different. I didn't just feel served, I felt welcomed. Inside the company, morale soared. Over 70% of employees reported feeling proud to wear the Aurora uniform again. And by the end of the first post-restructuring quarter, Aurora's stock price had climbed 17%, surpassing even the most optimistic forecasts. The Wall Street Journal ran the headline from "Scandal to Symbol, Aurora Air and the Monroe Revolution." But Alicia didn't care about the headlines. She remained in her office on the 50th floor, gazing at the New York skyline where Aurora planes traced silver arcs through the clouds. When she saw a 787 with its blue-silver logo lifting into the sky, she smiled, knowing that inside were hundreds of people learning to fly with respect, not privilege. Marcus Hill stepped in, coffee in hand. "You know," he said, "everyone at Aurora calls you the quiet storm. You never raised your voice, but you changed the direction of the wind." Alicia laughed softly. "I never wanted to be a storm, Marcus. I just wanted the wind to change so that the people who were once blown aside can finally fly with it." One late afternoon, an email arrived from Captain Richard Sullivan, the pilot who once doubted her. He had completed his training. His message read, "I thought I understood the sky. Turns out, I'd only ever seen it from one altitude. Thank you for opening the eyes of an old man." Alicia smiled after reading it. Perhaps this, she thought, was the real profit of reform, not numbers on a stock chart, but people transformed from within. When Aurora Air unveiled its new global policy, "Equity Above the Clouds," a pledge that every passenger would be treated equally everywhere, Alicia stood on stage not to talk about power or titles, but to tell a story. She told the story of a woman once mistaken for the help on the first-class flight of the very airline she would later own. She told it softly, without anger or accusation, and ended with a line that left the entire room silent. That day, they said I didn't belong in first class. 6 weeks later, I didn't just sit there, I made them understand that first class isn't a seat. It's how we treat each other. A year later, the story of Aurora Air still echoed through the aviation industry. But for Alicia Monroe, the journey was far from over. Because true justice isn't just changing one airline, it's inspiring a generation to understand that human dignity should never depend on altitude. Time moved faster than Alicia expected. It had been only 6 weeks since Aurora Air was reborn. Yet, to her, it felt like a long journey, a journey of watching people change when given a real chance to start over. If the first stage of reform was about rebuilding the framework, this next chapter was about something harder healing. One April morning, Alicia arrived at Aurora Air headquarters unannounced. No media entourage, no cameras, no reporters. She simply wanted to see what was truly happening behind all the polished reports. The first thing that made her smile was Melanie Parker, standing behind the customer service counter, a calm smile on her face, patiently assisting an elderly passenger complaining about a delayed flight. "We're truly sorry for the inconvenience, sir," she said warmly, "but I'll make sure to rebook your seat and guarantee you priority boarding. I understand how frustrating this wait must be. I've been in your shoes before." Alicia stood at a distance, quietly watching. She remembered that first meeting after landing, how Melanie had nearly broken down in tears, whispering, "I didn't know I'd hurt anyone." But now, her eyes were different, calm, respectful, honest. When Melanie noticed Alicia, she froze for a second, then smiled. "Ms. Monroe, I didn't know you'd be here today," Alicia replied softly. "I just wanted to see it for myself, and I think I've seen the change I hoped for." Melanie bowed her head, voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for not firing me. If you'd been angry that day, I would have lost more than my job. You saved my dignity too." Alicia placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No one learns by being pushed out," she said quietly. "But everyone can change if they're given the chance to face themselves." Leaving the counter, Alicia went downstairs to a training room where a bridges session was underway. A male voice echoed through the room, deep, clear, and genuine. "I used to think I understood customers. I believed good service was enough. But I forgot sometimes what people need most isn't perfect service. It's real respect." The speaker was Kyle Brooks, no longer the reckless young attendant from that flight. He now stood before the class as an instructor, teaching new hires about attitude, empathy, and the value of fairness. Alicia sat quietly at the back, listening. When the session ended, Kyle noticed her. He walked over and bowed slightly. "I didn't think you'd show up here." Alicia smiled. "I wanted to see how you teach. Looks like you've found yourself." Kyle's voice grew low, sincere. "That day on the plane, I thought you were trying to prove your power. But later, I realized you weren't seeking revenge. You wanted us to wake up. And that's what shamed me most." Alicia's expression softened. "There's no shame in change, Kyle. The real danger is staying the same and convincing yourself you're right. Not everyone's story ended as gracefully as Melanie's or Kyle's. Bradley Thompson, the businessman who had sat beside Alicia on that fateful flight, chose a different path. After the incident went public, investigations revealed he'd leaked internal data from Aurora to a rival airline. He was dismissed and placed under legal review. When Marcus Hill reported the news, Alicia said nothing. A month later, she received a handwritten letter sent to Monroe Holdings from Bradley himself. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote, "but I want you to know when I lost everything, I finally understood what it feels like to be looked at with disdain. I'm now teaching at a community college, working with students I once thought didn't deserve higher education. I teach them business planning, and sometimes I tell your story to remind them that real power isn't in a bank account, but in how you treat people when it'd be easy to humiliate them." Alicia finished reading, folded the letter, and placed it in a private drawer in her desk. She didn't respond, but her eyes softened. Perhaps, she thought, some redemptions need silence to grow. As for Captain Richard Sullivan, the pilot who had once doubted her, he quietly chose to retire. The day he submitted his papers, he sent Alicia a small envelope. Inside was his revoked commercial pilot's license. On the back, written in neat ink, were the words I flew for 30 years without ever truly seeing who sat behind seat 1A. "Thank you for making me finally look not just at passengers, but at myself." Alicia framed the card and kept it on her desk not as a trophy of victory, but as a reminder that justice isn't about making others fall, it's about helping them see what's right. When she left headquarters that evening, the sky was still and golden. Down on the tarmac, rows of Aurora Air planes gleamed in the sunset. On each fuselage, the words "Zero Discrimination" shone proudly. Alicia stood for a moment, watching, and she realized perhaps the greatest thing she'd ever done wasn't owning an airline, but teaching one how to take off again powered by humanity. 1 year later, Aurora Air became the most beloved airline in America. But for Alicia Monroe, the story wasn't over, because what she truly wanted wasn't just a fair airline, it was a generation that understood justice doesn't come from power, but from how we treat the powerless when no one is watching. A year had passed since the fateful Aurora Air flight, and since the day Alicia Monroe quietly rewrote the meaning of justice in the American sky. By the following April, when the nation's major papers released their annual airline rankings, Aurora Air topped the list with a 92% customer satisfaction rate, the highest in the company's history. But what captured the public's attention wasn't just the numbers, it was the story behind them. Alicia no longer appeared under the bright lights of the media as often as she once did. Instead, she spent her time on the ground taking internal flights, visiting training centers, and speaking with employees at every level. Wherever she went, people didn't just see her as the powerful chairwoman, they saw her as the woman who had transformed Aurora Air from a company once boycotted into a symbol of rebirth through compassion. The New York Times called her the woman who rebuilt the sky. Forbes wrote she didn't just buy an airline, she bought back the trust of millions. And for countless older passengers, especially Black, brown, and immigrant travelers, the name Alicia Monroe carried something deeper than admiration. It meant hope. One foggy March morning, Alicia sat in her office at Monroe Holdings, gazing out over the muted skyline of New York City. Today marked the launch of something deeply personal, the Tiana Johnson Scholarship. Tiana Johnson, her mother's name, a small black woman who had taught Alicia to read, to dream, and to believe that you'll have to be twice as good to go half as far. This scholarship wasn't just a tribute to her mother, it was a promise to every child like the one Alicia once was bright, capable, but underestimated because of the color of their skin or the place they came from. The launch ceremony was held at Aurora Air's Flight Training Center in Chicago, the very city where Alicia had grown up. Behind the podium hung a white banner that read, "The Tiana Johnson Scholarship, Lifting Dreams, One Flight at a Time." When Alicia took the stage, the crowd fell silent. She didn't read from a prepared speech. She spoke softly, as if telling an old story to friends. "When I was a girl, I used to sit on the roof of our old house on the south side, staring at the sky. I told my mother that one day I'd fly. She smiled and said, 'You will, but not with wings. You'll fly with your will.' Today, I want every child here to know your wings can be made of knowledge, effort, and the unshakable belief that you deserve to rise just like anyone else." Below her, a group of young students, the first scholarship recipients, quietly wiped their tears. They knew this moment wasn't just theirs. It belonged to every generation that had ever been told to bow their heads just to fit in. Marcus Hill, now officially the CEO of Aurora Air, spoke after Alicia. His voice wavered slightly as he looked around the hall. "If anyone asks me what changed Aurora, I won't talk about strategy or technology. I'll talk about the woman who taught us that respect can save an entire company." The audience rose in applause, and in that moment, Alicia caught her reflection in the glass wall behind the stage, no longer the woman once humiliated in first class, but the one who had turned that humiliation into a movement. After the ceremony, a veteran reporter from CBS News approached her. "Ms. Monroe," he asked, "if you could go back to that moment, the moment they insulted you on that flight, would you react differently?" Alicia smiled. "I'd do exactly the same, because if I'd gotten angry, I would have proven what they wanted to believe, that I didn't belong there. But when I stayed calm, I made them question themselves. And sometimes that's the most powerful way to change a system." In the months that followed, the Tiana Johnson Scholarship became a phenomenon. Hundreds of students received funding to study aviation engineering, airport management, and customer service. Many of them were children of Aurora employees, people who had never imagined their kids could go to college. A year later, those young faces appeared in Aurora Air's new campaign, "From the Skies Where Injustice Once Lived." We take off for a new generation, fairer, kinder, more human. One quiet evening, Alicia returned to JFK Airport. She sat in first-class seat 1A, the same spot as a year before. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. The flight attendant that evening was a young Latina woman. When she handed Alicia a drink, she smiled and said, "Monroe, I've heard your story. Thank you for making us proud to work here." Alicia nodded, her eyes glistening. She turned toward the window outside. A black female pilot was stepping into the cockpit. Alicia smiled softly and whispered, "Mama, they see me now. Not just me, all of us." The plane began to roll down the runway, and in the amber sky, the sunset blended into the eyes of the woman who had once been despised and now stood as a symbol of faith, dignity, and wisdom. As Aurora Air continued to soar, people no longer spoke of a scandal or a corporate takeover. They spoke of Alicia Monroe as proof that sometimes justice doesn't roar or demand. It simply stands tall in silence until the world has no choice but to bow in recognition. High above the silver-blue horizon, 1 year after that fateful day, an Aurora Air Boeing 787 glides smoothly through clouds soft as silk. In first class, seat 1A, the same view sits Alicia Monroe, her gaze steady on the boundless sky. But everything has changed. This time, when she boarded, there were no judgmental eyes, no suspicious stares. The flight attendant greeted her with a genuine smile. And the captain tonight was a young black female pilot, once a recipient of the Tiana Johnson Scholarship founded by Alicia herself. At that moment, Alicia looked toward the cockpit window, as if seeing her younger self reflected back the woman who had once been asked whether she was in the wrong place. Now, she was the one defining what it meant for an airline to treat people right. The jet ascended gently. As the hum of the engines softened, Alicia reached into her purse and drew out an old photograph, one of her and her mother, Tiana Johnson, standing in front of their small home on the south side of Chicago. She smiled faintly, whispering the words her mother once told her, a prophecy she hadn't understood until now. They won't truly see you, baby, until you own the sky they're flying in. Back then, she'd thought her mother was only trying to comfort her. But now, watching hundreds of Aurora airplanes take off and land each day beneath her, she knew Mama was right. It wasn't about ownership in the financial sense. It was about holding the spirit of that sky, a sky where every soul is treated as equal. Alicia used to believe that power was something to be won, protected, and wielded with iron resolve. But the past year had taught her otherwise. Power only matters when it lifts others up. She hadn't punished those who once humiliated her. Instead, she gave them a chance to change. And, strangely enough, that grace had made Aurora Air not only stronger, but beloved. Profits rose, stocks soared. But what meant the most to Alicia were the handwritten letters she received from employees and passengers alike. One came from a white mother in Texas. "Thank you, Miss Monroe, my daughter. She's 10, said she wants to be a pilot like the woman she saw on TV, the one who looks like you. She told me, if she can do it, so can I." Alicia folded the letter carefully and slipped it into a notebook titled "The Sky Belongs to Everyone." Beside her, an elderly man, a retired aerospace engineer, leaned over with a kind smile. "You're Ms. Monroe, aren't you? I just wanted to say you made me believe again that ethics and profit can actually coexist. I used to think one always had to die for the other to survive." Alicia smiled, her tone calm and assured. "I used to think that too, until I realized ethics are the most sustainable form of profit. Because when people are treated fairly, they work better, they live better, and eventually, the whole world becomes better." The man nodded, his eyes soft with respect. As the plane cruised over the Atlantic, the sunset turned the sky to fire. Alicia pulled out a pen engraved with her mother's name, Tiana Johnson, and wrote quietly in her journal, "Mama, I did it. But more importantly, I helped others believe they can do it too." Outside, the last rays of sunlight reflected off the wing and onto her face, illuminating her eyes not with pride, but with peace. When the plane landed in Seattle, passengers slowly filed out. The young pilot approached her bright-eyed, smiling with the kind of pride that could light up a runway. "Ms. Monroe, if it weren't for your scholarship, I'd still be working as a cashier at a gas station. Today, when I held that yoke in my hands, I just wished my mom could have seen it." Alicia smiled softly, taking the young woman's hand. "She might not be here, sweetheart, but believe me, she sees you, and she's so proud." For a moment, the two women, two generations, two different shades of skin, one shared journey stood amid the bustling airport crowd, smiling through their tears. Before leaving, Alicia turned back toward the runway. An Aurora Air jet stood gleaming under the night lights, its logo shimmering like a promise fulfilled. She knew the story had come full circle. No more anger, no more bitterness, only understanding, faith, and legacy. Because true justice isn't when the wronged finally strike back. It's when they use their pain to stop others from being hurt the same way. A year later, the world no longer saw Alicia Monroe as the powerful black billionaire. They called her the rebuilder of skies, and those who had followed her story from the start still remembered the words she spoke in her final interview. "I never wanted to make anyone kneel. I just wanted everyone to stand tall side by side." That single sentence, simple yet unshakable, became Aurora Air's new global slogan, displayed across every airport where their planes touched the ground. That night, Alicia sat alone in her hotel suite, gazing out at the glowing skyline. She wasn't thinking about power or profit. She was thinking about her mother and about the next generation, who could now board a plane with pride instead of fear. She whispered, barely above a breath, "Mama, the sky's ours now." And so, from a flight once clouded by prejudice, Alicia Monroe turned her personal story into a shared legacy for an entire generation. Because sometimes how we respond to injustice doesn't just change our fate, it rewrites how the world defines justice, dignity, and humanity itself. The story of Alicia Monroe isn't just about a black woman rising above prejudice. It's a mirror for anyone who's ever been underestimated, misjudged, or forced to choose wisdom over anger. When she was insulted, Alicia didn't strike back with harsh words. She chose silence, observation, and action grounded in her true worth. And it was that calm strength, that quiet grace that made the whole world stop and look again. The greatest message in her story is this: power doesn't need to shout to be heard. It's proven by how we treat others when we have the power to make them feel small. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about change, so that no one else has to suffer the pain you once endured. Alicia didn't just buy an airline. She bought back the world's faith that ethics and profit can coexist, that compassion can thrive even in the most competitive places on earth. If you've ever been misunderstood or underestimated, remember this: you don't have to raise your voice to prove your value. Let your actions, your character, and your perseverance speak for you. Because in the end, wisdom and dignity are the wings that lift us above every prejudice. Thank you for journeying with us through this story. If you believe in the quiet power of compassion and justice, please like, share, and subscribe so together we can keep telling stories that remind the world what humanity truly looks like.